Oh, gotta love this new update. Boom. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have all of you here. In case you don't know, I am Zach Berg. I'm the head cheesemonger, one of the co-owners of Mongers Provisions, and we are so excited for like a really cool lineup. And also, as somebody mentioned earlier, it's our last tasting of the year, but it's also like a very special tasting because it's all about this Michigan pride. I think a lot about, you know, obviously I'm passionate about all the products we sell, but when I think about the different like missions we have and hopes when we first started, especially, it's to highlight the products that we have close to us and to talk about the people who make really amazing products who don't get to talk about themselves enough. And today is going to be a really like beautiful version of that. And we even have a wonderful cheesemaker in our midst. So it's going to be very, very special. As I was saying earlier, please let us know what questions you have. Yeah, you can type them in the chat if you want to go that route, or you can unmute yourself. It's a nice small group tonight. And this is always so much more fun when we get to go down those tangents and such. So yeah. As always, we're gonna kind of eat, we're gonna start with the wine, we're gonna talk and introduce everything, and then we'll start doing the pairings and talk about how to add it all together and make some beautiful different spreads. So that's the plan for tonight. Does anybody have early questions?
Good,
cool.
Good to go. Someone already broke out the roulette, so you're
good. Yeah, and actually, that's a good reminder. Go ahead and skip around, do whatever you want. You have a little roadmap, so please eat whatever looks delicious. For me, it's the Bridgewater's been calling out to me. I'm going to go ahead and take my own advice, but just make sure you leave enough that when we get to that product, you're not looking at a sad, empty spot. So today, the first thing I want to talk about is the wine. We have one wine because I was so excited to kind of spend a little bit more on that and highlight a Michigan wine. And Michigan wine, because it's still young, I would say it's not necessarily value wine. It's not like getting a California red jug wine. They're a little pricier. And we have one from a larger producer, someone you might see at more stores, but we have a variety that doesn't get out as much. These guys really focus on their blend, but they're like, I don't know, it's very fun to look into this company because they've been doing it since before I was aware Michigan wine was even really started. So in the mid 70s, these folks at Old Mission Peninsula started, and they're actually really responsible for getting the Old Mission identified as its own AVA. So I think that's just amazing. And so they have really a collection of some older vines as well as younger. It is, and they're pulling from all over a pretty good amount of estate. And I found this to be a really delicious Pinot Noir. I've been tasting Michigan wine for a while, and it's been really fun to see it get better and better and better, especially in the dry category, right? There's always some great Rieslings and, sweeter wines coming from these northern areas, but this wine shares the 45th parallel with Burgundy. And so you're starting to taste some of the realities of what we can do in Michigan. And I think that it really is, taken 50 years to get there. And I think we owe a lot to these guys. And so I was excited to show somebody that surprised me when I got to taste it. So a little Pinot Noir to start off the night. The jam we have, I think many of you have tasted different things from Gus and Gray. She's just awesome. If you haven't had a chance to meet Tara Gray in person, I highly suggest you find yourself at the Eastern Market on a Saturday, or go find her. She's I like to joke, a walking Bitmoji. She's very animated. She kicks up her heel when she leaves the room and things like this. And she just makes the best jam. Jam nut jelly, her hashtags are perfect. And she's using as much Michigan fruit as she can. And we actually met at like a dinner party when I first moved home. And, we've been working together ever since we had Mongers. So I want to say day one, we opened up with Gus and Gray, and it's been our main jam producer ever since. And I think what really makes her stuff special is how low the sugar is. To me, it just tastes like the purest expression of fruit. And that works really well with cheese because sugar and acid and all these things are different things that are going to interact with the cheese, sure. But I also think sometimes can set it on some tangents. So we have either the Moody Blues or the trifecta, and those are our accoutrement for the night. To dive into the cheese, you know, it's Idle Farms. Idle Farms is having a great year, and they're about to actually they're winding down. So we got a call maybe 2 weeks ago that they're sold out for October, and their season is really rapidly kind of ending, which is really exciting. It's always beautiful to see them honor those natural seasons and let the goats take a break. Cows you can milk year round. Goat and sheep, they prefer to have a seasons. Cows do too, but we've really pushed past with industrialization, where cows most of the time have a scattered lactation cycle, so you can always have cows in the herd. And many people using the lights and stuff like that in the barn will trick the goats, but these folks are doing so many different things right, and kind of the hard way to make a beautiful goat cheese. And I was talking earlier when someone was asking about the lavender. I love goat cheeses that are just plain goat cheese. This is absolutely one of my favorite in the country. But when you get a goat log or just a goat puck like this and it's plain, I think, yes, it's a beautiful way to really get to taste that thumbprint and get to know that creamery, because it's the closest to just pure milk you'll get. But they're also a great blank slate for you to kind of dress up your own way. So you could do the lavender. Sometimes lavender, like dried like this, can be a little coarse on the palate. So you might want to give it a chop or let it steep in a little bit of water to soften it up, and then roll it out there, or a simple syrup or something like that would give it some moisture and sweetness at the same time. Some of my favorite things to do is chop up Marcona almonds and do pimenton and make a kind of spicy, nutty Spanish goat log. But and then the other one is boozy. Anytime I can take like cherries or raisins and soak them in a little booze and then roll it, that's always a really fun way to kind of dress up these goat cheeses. But these really don't need anything, but they're so delicious. I don't know if you saw, I kind of broke it apart while I was eating it. It always blows my mind how delicate their cheese is. And, that's because they're hand ladling it. So as I pull it apart, you can see it actually like breaks in an organic fashion. And that's because it hasn't gone through like a big extruder that would have just broken all that texture apart. And it also on the tongue just flutters away because of that. Big fans of Idle, always are. And this is showing just deliciously. We ready to jump over to Zingerman's? So it's always funny to me when we talk about local in Michigan, because these guys are kind of far away. At first when we opened, we looked at a bunch of stuff in Southern Ohio because we were really trying to think about it geographically, who's close. And we love everything going on up north, but it's so fun to have someone that's 40 minutes away. And I actually drove out to Ann Arbor just this week to say hi and pick up some of these wonderful cheeses. So the first one we have is the Chelsea. And both these cheeses are informed by like kind of the same traditions. The Loire is such a cool part of France, and you get a lot of cheese diversity in this like really narrow path along the river. And one of the things that's known for in terms of the cheese diversity of this region is playing with shapes, right? We talk about it sometimes with Idle, where the Idle Gris versus the Mont Idle, very different cheeses, the same milk, same molds, just packed differently, different rind to paste ratios. And the Lower Valley is full of like little goat cheeses in this shape, little goat cheeses in a log, little goat cheeses in a donut, so on and so forth. And, you get such a different experience. So the Chelsea, I find to be much nicer. Nicer is the wrong term, milder, I guess, than the Little Ipsy, which is the same milk, but in a tiny disc. And this is going to be more like, those ash ripened goat cheeses that we often see in our case. Ash neutralizes the pH of goat's milk in this really beautiful way. And so I've been really enjoying snacking on these Chelsea. I've been finding in contrast to the first cheese, it's really dense. It has almost like a fudgy quality to it. I'm excited as I look ahead to the pairing point. I think that tonight's cheeses are going to be a lot of fun with some of the chocolates, or with the chocolate, I should say. Any early questions so far, friends?
So Zach, you have this fresh goat cheese for the first one. You have the Chelsea for the second one. What's some ways to cook with these kind of cheeses?
That's a good question. These type of cheeses, because they're so delicate, heat will hit them quickly, you should say. Like, if I wanted to use this fresh goat cheese, you can certainly use it in a pizza, but I wouldn't necessarily put it on a raw pizza dough. I would want it to be like a par-baked pizza dough, and then just kiss it with the heat because it's going to kind of liquefy pretty quickly. The Chelsea, because it has less moisture, will hold up all right under some heat, but it's not going to melt like something that has developed protein in the way that, you know, the last cheese has, or a mozzarella where we've really pulled the proteins. They're really great, especially as fall starts coming around, to if you're roasting squash or something like that, you can throw, you know, some dollops of the goat cheese on your pan as they're coming out and get like some really beautiful quick melting on it on something like roasted delicata, or if you could put it in the center of your acorn squash with your, you know, the same type of function that you would with butter and cinnamon and sugar. So I think that's really fun. The Chelsea, as you get to the Chelsea and the Bridgewater, I've always been a fan of actually playing up some of the funkier, some of the flavors of the rind. So cooking these cheeses with cruciferous vegetables or asparagus is like my favorite. This cheese right here, you know, doing something where I used Gruyere still as my base or something like that, or our beautiful raclette as the base of like a gratin, but also throwing some root vegetables in that gratin and then that cheese to play up some of the different flavors the roots give you. That's where my head goes. Great question, Benji. Thank you.
Other question: what point is the ash introduced while making the Chelsea?
So it's going to be at the end. You know, Josh, as a cheesemaker, at any point, if I say something that's totally crazy, please go ahead and correct me. But I think you would have the cheese come out of the mold. You would give it a day or so to get some of the initial moisture off, and then you're going to hit it with the ash. And the ash grows with the, you know, the mold on the rind. And so it's very early in the infancy of the cheese. Yeah. And guys, don't forget how delicious this jam is. It's going to go throughout the night. And so I really like these little petite toasts we did today. I think because I was so into the jam, they kind of work almost better in my mind than a cracker. So yeah, it's all going to be delicious in that regard.
Perfect. We also have a discussion going on. Someone has an amazing goat cheese pumpkin pasta recipe. And then Amy from Idle said, throw Idle Pastures in your pasta or pasta sauce and mix it in for a tangy protein punch. So pastas.
I love that. Fresh. I often throw it in at the end of my mac and cheese because it will kind of incorporate with everything once you turn off the heat and give it that tang that I quite like. So I throw it in a lot of my mac and cheeses, have a little bit of goat cheese. Are we ready for Bridgewater, friends?
I think so.
Okay, beautiful. So the Bridgewater, I talked about in the text, and I want to highlight it after I take this bite, that we have a new format of Bridgewater here. You know, Zingerman's has been around for a long time. The Creamery has been around, if I remember randomly off the top of my head, I want to say since like 2005 or something like that. And it's gone through a couple different ownership rounds. And right now, a gentleman named Aaron is in ownership of the Creamery. And it's been so fun to have new energy there. Aaron comes from a dairy family, and his family was providing the cow's milk for a long time to the Creamery. And he's found himself now at the helm of the Creamery, and he's been really trying to, you know, both come up with brand new recipes, as we saw in our monthly subscription box this week. We talked about the mini goat brie and their mini bries, both which were new recipes. But in this case, he's taking an old recipe and changing the format. So Bridgewater were always these little like snowballs, and they still make them in the single rounds. But in this case, he's once again tipping his hat to that area, to the Loire, and doing a boucheron style cheese. What's nice about getting this cheese in that format is you can see there's so much more of a cream line. I find Bridgewater's, they never break down in that kind of a way. So this is giving you much more of that, you know, two cheeses in one, where you get the center, what's really fluffy and has more of that dense texture like a Chelsea, but you also have that cream line, which gives you almost like this brie experience. And this is a really great place to try rind if you've not generally found yourself enjoying rind. You know, these are usually going to be a tastier rind, and so it's a great time to try. Bridgewater is also peppered, which is really fun, and I think that, you know, flavored cheeses don't get enough airtime at our store. classically fancy cheese shops kind of turn their nose at flavored cheese, but I've always loved flavored cheese. And so working at Zingerman's, there are very few of them that buy right the same. It's been really fun to kind of be the buyer and choose what we want. And so we've always enjoyed things like Red Dragon, the whole lineup of the different flavored idols, and having a pepper cheese here and there. They're just so fun, and they play with different flavors in a really different way than I think other foods do. So adding a little black pepper is very fun to me.
The Carps have announced that the Bridgewater and the jam is a +3 in their mind.
Woo! I love that. Thank you for using the nomenclature as well. Always appreciate that, Carp family. Yeah, I think that the idea of the jam and the pepper to me is a big part of why that really raises the bar on that cheese. I also, for anybody who finds rinds to be too intense or doesn't necessarily love goat cheese and finds that to be intense, the jam's a great way to have a different experience with the cheese and see if you can round out some of the edges that you found. Sometimes I think pairings are always about enhancing things, but sometimes it's about saving things, if you will, or finding a way to enjoy and kind of isolate the flavors you enjoy most. Are we ready for somebody else to talk about cheese for a little bit? Yeah? Okay. I want to introduce somebody. And before we introduce the man, I want to talk about the cheese just real briefly in terms of my interaction with this cheese. Leelanau Raclette has a reputation in the area. I think it's, not even in the area, it has an international acclaim. And since I moved home, I've always been trying to get this cheese, and I'd call once a year and see if Ann and John would sell me any cheese. And, once a year they tell me no. And that was really our relationship. One time when we were still in Ferndale, we got a quarter wheel of Leelanau Raclette through a importer or a distributor in Chicago. It felt like we weren't supposed to have it, but we somehow got it. And that's the only time we've ever had it. So it has this allure, it has this mystique, if you will. And I was so excited. Amy from Idol made the introduction where I could actually start getting this cheese and learn about the story that they're going through in the transition. And so I don't want to say much more, but I would love to introduce Josh, who's from Leelanau Raclette, and hear about, tell us about what's going on at the creamery and how you find yourself in it and all that kind of fun stuff.
Great. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay, good. Yeah. So first I just want to say thanks to Zach for letting me be here. I made a tragic mistake not getting Zach my address soon enough to get this package. So I'm just salivating, watch everybody eat this cheese and not having some. But I am familiar with the raclette, so I can speak about that a little bit. Yeah, so recently just transitioning into ownership of Leelanau Cheese with some incredible partners, some of which are here with us tonight, Amy Spitznagel. It's been an incredible thing for a number of reasons. First of all, for 15 years, I've been making cheese with the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Michigan State University, and find myself swimming in many of the same circles as John and Ann Hoyt, and bumping up against their reputation as one of the most awarded cheesemakers in the country, this humble little cheese outfit in northern Michigan. And people would always say, oh, cool, you're from Michigan State. Can you get me Leelanau cheese? And now I'm happy to say that I can get you Leelanau cheese, but for many years, that was not the case. So yeah, so thanks again, Zach, for letting us be here and talk about it a little bit. Here for me, the magic of this cheese, it is in the same family of cheeses, those Alpine cheeses, Comté, Gruyere, Beaufort. These cheeses sort of outline that whole region. But raclette is magic when it's melted. It is a transformative thing that happens when you heat up that cheese, and it's meant to be paired. That's the beautiful thing, and I think that is one of the beautiful things about what Zach does here is he puts together these connection of different foods that are that work well together. And raclette is built for that thing. It is a cheese that's meant to be melted on something: cornichons, root vegetables, cured meats, all of those things it pairs with very well. So like, I'm in love with this cheese. And I think this is what is the difference between maybe a cheesemonger and a cheesemaker. Cheesemaker is sort of a monogamous relationship with a cheese, and a cheesemonger has a polyamorous relationship with all cheeses. And so for me, I want to know the ins and outs of this cheese. So these are a couple of things that I can tell you about this cheese that make it special. Number one, first, the cheese is aged very carefully, so that we have a right amount of protein degradation in the cheese. So when a cheese ages, there is a cascade of enzyme interactions that are responsible for many different things chemically in the cheese: lipolysis, breakdown of fats; proteolysis, breakdown of proteins. And protein is really the matrix in the cheese that provides the structure. So if you age too long, when you age a cheese, then it gets really soupy. The fats separate really easily. So if we're making a cheese with the intent to melt, we have to think about how intact do we want the protein to be. So that's the first magical thing about that, is the cheese is aged to be melted. The second thing that I think is just phenomenal about this, and I was actually staggered with in the transition and training and the apprenticeship that we've been going through over the last year with John and Ann, is the emphasis on cave practices and affinage of the cheese. So for the raclette, it is a cheese that in the cave, every day we interact with. Every day we flip the cheese and wash it with a brine solution that's pH balanced, and that has just the right level of salinity so as not to make the cheese too salty, and also cultivate the right microbiome of microflora on the surface of the cheese. And so that's where that really bright orange bloom is from. And getting that right really is experience, mastery, knowing the conditions of your cave, the environment. So the age of the cheese, the protein breakdown, the surface of that, and then obviously the cultures that we utilize in the make of the cheese and the curd itself are very specific to this variety of cheese. So it's got those familiar characteristics, that the nuttiness, the caramelized onion notes in there, but it is a very pleasingly mild cheese. It's a very approachable cheese. So all those things together are what make me love that cheese, and I hope you're I hope you're enjoying it, because there's a ton of thought and effort that goes into each one of those wheels.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a deep dive into it. And I mentioned earlier that this rind opportunity on Bridgewater, but I take it back. If you don't usually love rinds, this is a really beautiful and delicate rind, and is a great opportunity to kind of, if you've only been eating the paste of the cheese, it's a great opportunity to get another dimension of a cheese. And this is an incredibly, like I said, tasty and delicate rind. You guys do a great job with that.
Thanks.
Where is Ann and John been sourcing milk from the same producer their entire career? And are you guys expanding their milking operations, or finding new milk to be put into the flow of things?
Yeah, as you'd expect, and this is why Amy and Idle Farms, as farmstead cheesemakers, have taken full control of their milk source, right? Because this is a crucial function for any cheesemaker. Any cheesemaker knows that the end product cannot be better than the milk source. It really can't. So John and Ann have been chasing the right milk source for 25 years. And this is one of the challenges of artisanal cheesemaker sort of in the modern era, when we see the aggregation of all these smaller farms into larger farms that have a very specific utility for the milk that they're going for. And if it's all this is going to be made into milk for Dannon yogurt, it's got to be this feed regimen, total mixed ration, or it's got to be, we want a certain amount of protein for this thing. Then it gives there's less of an emphasis on the type of things that a cheesemaker is looking at: fat to protein ratio, low somatic cell count, what are the bedding environments, how clean is the general environment, how close is the silage pile to the milk house. These things are like critical for a cheesemaker for a number of reasons, and could be a whole nother conversation. But to answer your question, yeah, so what we're doing right now is working with a couple different farms. One is adjacent to us, Lautner Farm, who supplies some of our milk for production, and then a farm about an hour away in Lake City. And both those farms are very open with us. We know the feed regimen, we know what the milking cycle looks like, and have relatively clean operations, which allow us to make sort of a consistently good product. But it is always a concern, because we are the slave of those those really good milk sources that we have to chase. And so in a place like Leelanau County, when historically there used to be like 50 dairy operations, obviously very small, and now there is one in Leelanau County where we're making cheese. So there's a certain scarcity there, not of abundance of milk. Michigan is the 6th largest milk producer in the nation, but in terms of the right type of milk for cheesemakers. But we're happy to say that we have some good, reliable farmers that like to work with us, and there's a lot of stuff on the horizon too. We've been contacted a couple of times just this month, actually, by people who are interested in starting small artisanal dairy operations, small herds, small, very focused management. So very exciting for us to see this reemergence of this trade, specifically for artisanal production.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think that one of the things that we as consumers and as lay people sometimes forget is that milk is by no means one thing. It changes daily, and that composition is so important. And it's such a myriad of factors that go into making your milk one way or another. And like Josh said, they're not in control often in the way that Amy can change the diet immediately, see the results, and have that really totally perfect closed loop. It's awesome that you guys are finding farm partners that can be open, and we can continue to see more amazing cheese, and hopefully be able to get this down a little further south and see this cheese on the counter more often.
Let's do it, Zach. Let's do
it. There you go. What other question, or does anybody have any questions for Josh?
So we've got a couple comments on, went to Raclette in NYC, had on a burger, amazing. First time I had a Raclette was the Mongers grilled cheese. So Josh, what's your go-to with Raclette when it comes to melting it? What's you go protein, you go vegetable? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love the contrast of, so you heat up that cheese again with Raclette. I feel like you're able to perceive the nuance of that cheese even when it's melted, especially when the rind on it gets infused in there. You get a sort of taste of what our cave smells like on the interior. Like, it's just a beautiful sort of experience. But I really like it sounds cliche, but the classic pairing of the cornichon with Raclette is a phenomenal experience. If you dig anything pickled, it's great. Pickled radishes, pickled onions, those things go very well with Raclette. But I can't get away from the reality of how good it is on a burger, or a BLT. You want to elevate those pedestrian foods all day long. And I think that's why places like NYC Raclette thrive, because they say, you know what, let's take that filet mignon and let's throw a half pound of cheese on top that's super hot. You can't get away from how amazing that is. So it's really it's pairable with so much stuff. But I really like, just the traditional cornichon and root vegetable sort of thing. It's good.
If you ever find yourself in Detroit, we'd love to make you a Detroit Raclette, which is we do it with chopped up cornichon and better made potato chips all stuffed in the sandwich and melted together, so you get all the different salty contrast. And I agree. I love meat all day long, but I prefer the cornichon is the centerpiece. It's not sausage and other proteins. I like that acid.
Yeah.
Benji, what other questions do we have in there?
So Zach obviously has a special wine for tonight, but do you have any wine pairings that you think go best with the Raclette from your end?
I think Zach is probably better poised to answer that question than I am. Again, my emphasis is cheese and that. I think I'd love to hear what Zach's thought is.
You know, I think mountain cheese as a whole category, they're I guess I would say, to back up a little bit, mountain cheeses are really where you can see how nerdy the cheesemongers are, because when you walk into a cheese shop, I think a lot of us instantly are like, wow, there's 6 Goudas here. There's a lot of cheddar here. Most of us aren't trained to see, wow, there's a lot of mountain cheese. But in the last like 10 years, and the time I've been selling cheese, it's such a flavorful and beautiful category. You see a lot of diversity in it. And so one of the things that's so special about mountain cheese, Josh is hitting it dead on. It inherently is a very other food friendly category and wine friendly. And what I like about it most is it can go white wine, it can go red wine usually, right? I think that's not always true. You know, like the first couple cheeses are much more classically a white wine cheese. And I think mountain cheeses, you know, if you go to the Jura, which is where Comte is from, they're drinking a lot of very thin red wines and some white wines, and then some yellow wines, which is oxidated white wines. Way different tangent, but either way, it shows that you can eat that cheese with any of those wines. It's always delicious. And I think that raclette is very much the same, right? We would think right away, with all that fat, white wine's going to be great. It's always going to cut through that extra fat. But I think that little like funk the rind has, and that little bit of, for me, I guess the word that comes to mind is fruitiness. It to me speaks to red wine. It speaks to the especially lighter body. I think that we sometimes have a like Pinot aversion at the shop, because we get pushback from customers, guests, and we want your opinions, obviously. But Pinot, I think, is sometimes maligned in America. People are like, I want something that I can chew in my wine. But I think these Pinots that have these pretty kind of Bing cherry flavors and a little bit more light vegetal flavors, to me, they really pull out some of the nuance and savory notes that these cheeses have. You know, some of those cheeses like Beaufort, the density of them make them so, it's like chewing a piece of steak sometimes. I mean, these cheeses are incredibly satisfying. You might have seen me sitting there and like playing with mine like silly putty, which I always do, because, you know, Josh was talking about the proteins being just right. And that, what was this beautiful phrase you used in the beginning? The degradation of proteins, I believe. Was that the phrase that you said? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Perfect. And you sit there and you play with these cheeses and you get a sense of, I mean, he is hitting a texture point so dead on, and it's hard to perceive that in our palates when we're chewing. There's a lot going on. You're digesting, you're salivating, you're tasting. Understanding protein to fat and like that, the elasticity of cheese I find it to be really hard on the palate. And so I always kind of play with this cheese, and I don't know, it's just so satisfying. It gives you a sense of how it melts. You can learn a lot about a cheese by working it between your fingers. So I encourage you to do it with this cheese, and I think it's just incredibly pairable and delicious. Thank you for sharing with us. What was that, Benji?
There's a couple more things that have popped up. Amy says she loves Kirsch with raclette. So it's a nice liqueur. And then Todd asks, what is the best way to melt raclette? Obviously, not everyone has their own raclette machine, essentially. But any recommendations?
Yeah, we get this question asked a lot in our shop, and there is no wrong answer, really. I mean, I know people that you know, like, oh, throw it in the microwave. No, listen, that's not my personal recommendation, but like, you do you. I'm not going to shame anybody for some weird cheese kink that you do and you're in the privacy of your own home. But I think that toaster ovens are way underrated for ease of access and approachability for raclette. Like, if you have some sourdough laying around and you throw some raclette on top of it and throw it in your toaster oven, super easy to do, super, you know, thought-free. That works well. Seasoned cast iron pans work well. You know, and then obviously raclette is one of those things that's scalable and meant to be like a communally shared food. So looking into a raclette grill, like I always tell people, like, if you're going to have cheese as a centerpiece and raclette's going to be part of that, you're going to get great utility out of investment in a raclette machine. So and there's just something magical about standing next to a raclette machine. We got a half wheel roasting, and all the accoutrement. It's just a whole event in and of itself. So there's shades of gray. If I'm by myself, like I throw stuff in the toaster oven with raclette all the time. If I'm putting on an event for people, then busting out the raclette grill is there's nothing so close to cool than doing that. So
yeah, it's such a multi-sensory experience to see it, like the bubble, to hear the sizzle, to smell it wafting. It's really second to none. It makes me feel like we must have one for the whenever we open in Berkeley and have a party to celebrate it. We'll have to bust out the raclette machine. Benji, any other good questions in there?
No, but Michael mentions he has a party to go raclette that uses candles. Uses it all the time. Good for limited space. So it's definitely another variation of it.
Yeah, we sell those out of the shop. A lot of people use those. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different inventions and things to use to make raclette. I like the ones with the little tea lights. They're incredibly convenient. Cool. Friends, are we ready to do some pairings and talk about adding it together? And I know a lot of people have been on tastings with us before and know our pairing scale. In fact, it was already used in the comments, but if you guys will entertain me, I'm going to go quickly and run y'all through how we think of pairings. We love pairings. I find it to be such a enjoyable way to, I don't know, it's fun way to explore cheese. And I've been selling cheese at this point for 12, 13 years. And somewhere about my halfway point is when I just kind of delved into pairings, and I've enjoyed them and learned a tremendous amount. And for me, the thing that I've always used is this pairing scale. I think that it's incredibly, it's withstood the test of time for me, and it's really open and loose, and it allows me to think about these concepts, because I think that we all have the language to say how much you like the wine tonight, or what do you think of this raclette? 1 through 10, one product, easy game. When you start to add things, it gets really difficult. And what I love about this is it's not a matter of only 2 products, although that's usually how I explain it. I think it works for 3, 4, layering all these things together, a recipe, if you will. You can still use this method. And so it goes from -2 to +3, which often confuses people because we don't have negative integers at the dinner table. But, we've all experienced a -2, brushing our teeth, getting that glass of orange juice too early in the morning. It's all contrast. It's the worst of all the flavors. We lose our minty fresh, our tropical sweetness, no bueno. A -1 is exactly the same, but just one element falls apart. I find actually red wine to be the most common culprit of the -1, where you'll eat something that's delicious, you'll drink your wine, and it's all of a sudden metallic. It's really harsh. Something had a negative interaction on the palate, but the food tasted good. Only -1. Zeros, I think, are an incredibly common experience, and because there's 2 reasons for a 0, right? I often talk about how the food industry overly promotes pairings, right? We expect whenever we put something together, like music should play and it should be this perfect pairing. And I think that the reason why pairings are fun is because not everything does that, right? Plenty of food doesn't have this interaction. They're kind of a neutral experience. I think the other biggest piece is mindfulness, right? When you're driving between meetings, you're not thinking and eating your sandwich, you're not thinking about how the mustard's cutting through the fat of the meat. You just want to keep the mustard out of your pants. And so I think most of us eat a lot of food without paying attention to our food. I am the most guilty of this. When you're watching television and snacking, or if you're eating cheese, drinking wine, and you're not really putting them together, there's not as much of this pairing thing happening. But when we actually put them together, we can get to some really cool things. So the +1, I often think of the tomato sauce. My sauce might feel flat, maybe it feels too acidic, or it's too sweet, whatever. I pour my red wine, all of a sudden my sauce is saved. The red wine is no better for existing in my sauce. So it's only a +1. hopefully a positive too is something you've experienced tonight, right? Maybe for you, you had found, something like Amy's goat cheese is so delicious and soft and light, but maybe the Chelsea's a little challenging for you and you found that to be too much, right? Too much rind. But if I put a little jam on it, it softens it and you start to, taste some of the more savory qualities and you kind of enjoy it. Or maybe with the red wine, you start to taste that, more kind of fruity breakdown and the rind that I was talking about in the raclette. And all of a sudden, everything gets a little nicer, right? The salt of the raclette brings out that beautiful wine, so on and so forth. And I always aim at positive twos. We love positive threes. They're great, but they're to me, they're incredibly hard to identify and they're historically significant, right? They're like culturally significant. We hear the same things over and over when it comes to positive threes. So, I think of Stilton and port wine, or I think of Foie Gras and Sauterne. In some ways, I think of, as soon as I tried that pairing, by the way, I loved it. Thank you, Carps, for sharing it. They did exactly what you're supposed to do in a positive three, which is tell everybody, right? No one keeps Manchego and Membrillo to themselves. You share these amazing pairings that kind of define a culture. And so when you find something that really sings together, it's important you share it. And I think that pepper and the sweetness, I don't know if anybody remember or is familiar with this sauce, a gastrique, but I was thinking of we did a peppered fruit gastrique once when I was working at a fancy restaurant with a duck breast, and this pairing like brought me right back to that duck breast and that preparation. I think it's really nice. The fruit and the black pepper really play so well with the cheese, and so positive threes to me are when you start to hear the music, when it becomes magical. And for us, I always think of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's our cultural positive three. I rarely eat peanut butter and jelly alone. I eat them together because the sum is greater than the parts. You've created this whole new thing. And that's what I look for in a positive three. Let's do a pairing. Let's actually sit here and try something and talk through it. I think the raclette should be the one. And sorry to continue to torture Josh, who does not have the box. I'm going to get you that. Don't worry. But everybody, go ahead and take a chunk of your raclette. And, if you don't already know it, go ahead and take a bite. Get that, capture your, your taste memory of what this cheese tastes like in isolation. And I really do encourage you to give it a little bit of warmth by playing with it. Once you feel like you know this cheese in your mind's eye, go ahead and introduce the wine. And, I don't emphasize this often enough, but really make sure there's still cheese in your mouth and that you're putting them together. I know it's not the most beautiful thing to think about, but it really makes a big difference when you're trying to evaluate pairings. Is there anybody who is brave who wants to talk about, what I really like to find is there a flavor that was there before that's altered in some way, or is there a brand new flavor that comes in light because of them together? Anybody have anything they want to share with the group?
Nothing yet on raclette, but we do have one person who jumped ahead a little bit, did the Idle Farms with chocolate and says it's kind of like a weird sort of s'more, just missing that graham cracker for a +1 right there.
I like that. That's a cool idea. I always love Idle cheeses with chocolate, especially the freshies. And I like goat milk with chocolate too, is a whole other tangent. I want to just give you my tasting notes, what I tasted. And, pairings and tastings are so personal, right? You hear people use tasting notes all the time. And I always think it's funny because, in some ways I'm like, have you had that before? Right? I often say Sancerre smells like the sidewalk after it rains. And I know that smell, but I've never licked the sidewalk after it rains. So, how much can I taste it? But I've not been to Leelanau cellars, and I don't know the cave, but I've been to plenty of cheese caves. And when you add that red wine, it really pulls out some of those cavier notes. It becomes a more robust cheese in a way that I really like. And I feel like it's more suggestive of the earthiness in that kind of a cool way. So people already know the script. Let's go to the chocolate, and I think go ahead and start trying it with the different cheeses if you want. I want to talk about Crow and Moss for a little bit, unless there's some cheese questions, Benji. Is that all right? Can I go to chocolate?
You can go to chocolate. Some couple notes. We're glad with the wine did taste earthier to a couple people. And then Amy did mention they've done a graham cracker chocolate and Idle Pastures, the honey lavender edition before, as the kind of more work from themselves. So
That sounds really good, and I'm probably going to try that soon. So Crow and Moss is a great chocolate company. Actually, real quick, before I talk about the chocolate company, I wanted to do a quick moment of just like to say thanks and how awesome it is to have two Michigan cheesemakers on this call. And, Michigan has a really beautiful agricultural scene and food scene. And I think that sometimes, we don't necessarily think of it as a cheese state because we're in the shadow of that big Wisconsin big brother. But I think that these folks are on the front lines of changing that perception. And I'm just so thankful that I got to move home and have people I could rep like this, because when I left home, there wasn't, a bunch of creameries that I could talk about. Michigan has $101 billion in food and agriculture, and we so often focus on things like potatoes, apples, lavender, asparagus, blueberries. And I think that what Amy and Josh are doing are, highlighting that we are the sixth in milk production in the country, and that we have some really amazing fields and pastures, and we have the ability to make just fantastic cheese. And so before I walk away from the cheese for a second, I just want to take a pause and say thank you guys. It's so exciting to be able to do a tasting like this, because 12 years ago when I was at Zingerman's, we couldn't have done this, quite frankly. It would have just been two cheeses, or it would have been the whole lineup of Zingerman's. There wasn't, and I couldn't have got my hands on Leland or Clet then. So it's very exciting and very exciting for me. So that's my tangent. Thank you. Crow and Moss. It's also cool to have chocolate makers in the state, and we have even less of that. Just a reminder of what a chocolate maker is and how we focus on chocolate versus chocolatiers. Both are really incredible, and we have a lot of respect for both arts. But chocolatiers buy chocolate. They buy bricks, they buy wafers, they melt it down, they make beautiful confections. I was a terrible chocolatier when I tried it. It's very hard. Chocolate makers, on the other hand, source beans and go from bean to bar. And I think that that's an incredible journey. And it's much more of like what we're talking about when we talk about what the milk that Josh has available is, or what the grapes on the 45th parallel do. That's the discussion of terroir. And when we get to talk about chocolate like this, we get to talk about terroir. And so Michigan has Mindo chocolate, it has Crow and Moss. We had Fresh Coast, we've lost Fresh Coast. There's only a handful. There's actually a new chocolate maker who just opened up in Kigo, Joir Chocolate, that I believe is finally available for resale. She was a cottage business for a while, so we couldn't sell her chocolate, only she could. But I believe she's growing out of that. And so it's very cool to see more and more chocolate makers in the state. Crow and Moss showed up at our Detroit grand opening, if anybody remembers back then. Oh no, that was Perennial. Never mind, I lied, apologize. But we've had a good relationship with these guys, and they're the ones who make our hot cocoa. And so if anybody's tried the Mongers drinking chocolate, that's made by Crow and Moss with Will's recipe. We've really enjoyed working together with them and developing that, and taking something that was at our grand opening in Ferndale 4 or 5 years ago, this taste memory of that hot chocolate, and recreate it in the bag that people can buy. They're up in Petoskey, and in this case, they're getting a Honduran chocolate, and I've been snacking on mine all night long. It's a beautiful chocolate, 70%. And, I think that I often kind of blow through the chocolate. And so I just want to take a moment to talk about evaluating chocolate, right? It's all about that snap, and you can really hear it in this bar. It's an incredibly well-made bar, and you also want it to be shiny, right? That's how we know chocolate's in temper. Chocolate is essentially a matrix of many different elements, fat, sugars, and a whole bunch of other things. And when it's in a perfect matrix, it's in temper. And when we see chocolate that looks dusty or looks old, or when it's really brittle and kind of doesn't shatter but crumbles in an irregular way, that's when it's not in temper. That matrix is broken in some way. This is a beautiful chocolate. And, in terms of adding cheeses, we kind of fell into the cheese and chocolate pairings. Our very first pop-ups were at Gale's Chocolates in Royal Oak. What would that have been, Benji? 2017 when we
Uh,
first started?
yeah, I think actually we ever did late 2016.
Wow, crazy. So, and in our first pairing or our first pop-up, everybody walked in and were like, "What's the pairing? You're at a chocolate shop." And we sat there very foolishly and we're like, "Huh, we have no idea." I probably made something up on the spot, but we had not really thought of that idea. And now, 5 years later, we have had a lot of fun with pairing cheese and chocolate. I think it can be a really fun way to, with the idol, it's a way of making your own milk chocolate in some ways, right? You have all this beautiful dairy, it adds a different tang and different dimension. And I think goat milk chocolates are super fun and fairly limited, but it's a really fun way to kind of get a different dimension and different pairings together. Um, I'm trying the raclette right now for the first time. The ratio is fairly important, and I think that more so than a lot of pairings, like chocolate's an incredibly flavorful thing. So I always want to make sure I have either something like a 1-to-1, or if anything, more cheese than chocolate when I'm doing these pairings. What questions do we have, friends?
We've had a few things in the chat. A couple people actually drinking cider tonight. Got some Blake's and
It's the
Scrumpy
season.
out there. So yeah, I mean, definitely good. A lot of good pairings there too. Some of them noted the nuttiness in the cheese that tastes well, Todd. So good call out there. Chocolate plus raclette +2. Idle Farms and chocolate reminds of a cannoli. So you got some really good comments.
That's cool.
There. Josh mentioned from Leland now that they do sell Grocer's Daughter chocolate in their store, which makes some really good unexpected pairings from there as well. And then Idle Cheese, I always felt like it should be in a crepe or ravioli, was mentioned by Dave as well. So a lot of fun comments in the chat going on right now.
Yeah, I think the Idle really could be used as a substitute for a lot of like ricotta type recipes or mascarpone. It's so delicate right now. I think you could totally work it into pasta fillings very easily, and that sounds delicious. Just a quick moment to remind everybody, we love our bean to bar chocolate, and we really love, I guess, having the conversation about why we're so passionate about sourcing these chocolates. The world and the story of chocolate, unfortunately, continues to be poorly told. If anybody wants to do a good deep dive into chocolate and some of the problems with it, the Washington Post did an article maybe 2-3 years ago in the summer, kind of talking about a request from the US, I think it was through the Congress, of all the big chocolate makers to identify their sourcing and have a better answer than, I don't know, it's chocolate. Here it is. Where are you getting your chocolate? Verify that there's no slave labor, child labor involved in chocolate. And so this was Hershey's, Nestle's, so on and so forth. And after they had a 20-year window to find out more about where they're sourcing their chocolate, and 20 years later, they all showed up and were like, I don't know. And so the world of chocolate is there's a lot of money in that, and there's a lot of chocolate being flown around the world, but it really grows in a very narrow band, 20 degrees north or south of the equator. So I can make it in Cuba, but I can't make it in Southern Florida. And we've experienced chocolate for so many years by talking about Swiss chocolate, German chocolate, Belgian chocolate. We talk about who made the chocolate. We don't talk about where it comes from. And when you don't know those answers, they're usually not the answers you want to hear. And so it's been so fun for us to explore the different terroirs of the world of chocolate and taste something from Honduras versus something Peru, and even get even more granular with companies like Maru, which we so often talk about, where we're talking about one side of the Mekong Delta versus the other. And so, chocolate is still not mechanically harvested anywhere on planet Earth, which means every chocolate we ever have involves somebody climbing up a tree and cutting out a cacao pod with a machete. And so whether you're drinking chocolate from Mongers or having a Swiss Miss pack, somebody climbed a tree and cut out a chocolate pod. And I think it's just important that we recognize that a dollar chocolate bar doesn't split that many ways, right? It takes a lot of effort to get chocolate from that tree to a chocolate bar. Will, in his geology brain, I always love this factoid, in terms of the particle size, taking a chocolate from cacao beans to chocolate bar is the equivalent of taking a masonry brick down to a grain of sand. So there's a lot of input that goes into that, and that's not even to mention the drying roasting and flying it across the world. So chocolate is an intense energy, intense process. And we really want to make sure that we're honoring everybody along the way. So we're so thankful to the different chocolate makers who are sourcing chocolate ethically. And, you don't see any symbols on the chocolate in terms of like fair trade. And so we really have to have that transparent relationship with our producers to know, are you doing direct trade? Are you, using a third party that's verifying things? And it's cool to see that there's so many more companies doing that work. So we love repping bean to bar chocolate. And it's cool. We're talking to a couple entrepreneurs who have been around for, not even a decade quite yet as entrepreneurs. And it's the same when you look at the chocolate wall. Most of these companies are only about 5 years, 8 years old, because the bean to bar conversation was not happening, 50 years ago.
We have a comment from Barbara saying Bridgewater and chocolate is souffle-like, and Chelsea and chocolate is more mousse-like. Interesting observation.
That's cool. I love those descriptions. Thank you.
So Zach, well, you're kind of tasting some of these cheeses and stuff like that. Q4 is coming up, winter, obviously. There's always special cheeses around. What makes the winter season a little bit different as we get into holidays from a cheese perspective? And then what are some of the goodies people can expect to pop up?
Great question. Thank you, Benji. Seasonality and cheese is an exercise in extrapolating a little bit, right? So when we have something like this idol, you can picture this cheese is only a couple weeks old. What the environment around us is like. When we get to something that like the raclette, we have to think, well, it's aged a little bit. What were the pastures like at that point? And so winter becomes really fun because there's a handful of cheeses that are just old enough where you have the height of summer milk. So the reason why Stilton's such a popular Christmas cheese is because Stilton that comes to perfect maturity right around Christmas is usually like July milk. And so it's the height of summer. And so seasonality in cheese is about how was the grass when the cheese was made. And this time of year, we get a lot of really fun cheeses, both because of that reality that they're summer milk, but also because they're just cheeses that, we see a lot of you in the next, 3 months. And we see a lot of you all the time. It's not anything to say like that, but we see so many people who are able to buy cheeses that we can't necessarily always buy because they don't have the volume of people to help us eat them. And so we have a couple of our classics, things like the extra age Comté. We always get a Comté Sagesse, the wise Comté. We'll get stuff like Road River Blue and Black Betty, which is the extra age Broadbender. Those are 3 that we've had every single holiday season. Rush Creek Reserve as well, the bark wrap cheese out of Wisconsin. And we get a couple of those fun cheeses. In terms of new things coming down the pipe this year, I guess something that we haven't had for almost 2 years, Andante is coming back. Andante is out of California, and as much as we love repping Michigan milk and all of that stuff, it is so fun to taste Andante cheeses, which really only find themselves at a very select few retail shops and at the best restaurants in the country. So 11 Madison Park and the French Laundry. So Young is really into fine dining. And so she has some beautiful menus that she finds herself on. So we'll be getting her back. We'll be doing a Pleasant Ridge Reserve. I'm trying to think if there's anything brand spanking new coming down. The cool thing with the new store is we have so much more space that we're really kind of exploring some of the things we've wanted to talk about in the past that we're going to now be able to bring in. And so we're doing the work right now of kind of figuring out what new, rabbit holes to jump down. And so one of the things I'm excited to bring in is going to be Rancho Gordo. If anybody's familiar with the heirloom bean producer out of the West Coast, I know that sounds like one of the more boring things you could come up with, but dried beans, they're incredible. And so we're going to have some of those guys stuff, and a whole bunch of new stuff. It's going to be fun. Holidays are always a good time. Oh, thank you. So we have a 240-pound wheel of cheese sitting waiting for the grand opening of the new store. So we have a wheel of Emmentaler. You guys have probably seen me wear my Emmentaler t-shirt. Emmentaler is what we call Swiss cheese. Emmentaler is what we call Swiss cheese. So the cheese with the big holes, those big eyes. But just like anything Emmentaler is Emmentaler. It's coming from the village of Emmentaler. It has a rich history, and we're not talking about some, factory Swiss cheese in Wisconsin. We're talking about a really true Swiss mountain cheese that's gorgeous. And I think that if I recall correctly, the wheel we're getting was about an 18-month wheel. So by the time we get to it, it'll be almost that 2-year mark. And it's going to be really fun to show people what Swiss cheese is really all about. That's going to be something we're definitely going to celebrate. Thank you, Benji.
Of course. A couple things from the chat. So Josh mentioned they use the idle pastures and curries and tikka masala for a serious tang and depth of flavor. So Indian food, really, really interesting maneuver there. And then the Carps ask, with the size of the new store, do you think you'll be able to find space to give the hard seltzer smoothie and cheese pairing of their dreams finally?
Yes, that sounds awesome. We are going to be expanding hard seltzer, beer, wine, all of that quite a bit. In terms of in-house smoothies with cheese, we're going to have to work on that, but I think Matthew would love to experiment with that. And we're hoping to expand. It won't happen right away, but our prepared foods. If anybody's made it to Detroit in the last 6 months, Matthew and the crew there has been crushing the grilled cheese game. There's been some really cool soups and grilled cheeses coming out of there. He's doing a weekly special, and I'm hoping that momentum will continue and we'll start to delve into things like case salads. There's also an in-house made chai tea. I imagine almost no one's tried it yet because I think the staff keeps drinking it before anybody could sell it. And there's a lot of really cool kind of things cooking up in that regard. We have an amazing staff right now with a lot of passion and curiosity. And so we're letting them kind of run in different tangents. Tea is something we never explored before, but now with Kim and Lena, we have a bunch of really cool teas and stuff like that. And they're the ones making the chai. So yeah. What else, friends? Any other questions?
We had a mention of a fancy honey and the raclette is a +2. So that's something there. Josh wants to be there for the Emmentaler reveal, so we'll have to make sure we invite him.
Yes, can help us open that sucker. Opening up that big of a cheese is something I've only had the privilege of doing once. But it takes more than one person, as you might imagine. I mentioned earlier that the Swiss love making cheese inventions. So there's like an Emmentaler sled. There's like a specific thing that you would carry an Emmentaler on, and I mean we don't have that. And so we're going to use 4 milk crates put on the corners of the round cheese so we can cut through without the cheese hitting the floor. I have some ideas, but Josh, you should come. It'll be fun and you can help.
Yeah, well, the smell of cracking that wheel open, I want to be there for that experience. I mean, on smaller wheels, it's still something to behold, but for something that is the size of me, that would be incredible.
And it's a time capsule, right? Like it's really, I love that you bring up that smell, and so few of us get to be there when a parm wheel opens or any of these Gruyères or things, but it's really this slice of what happened 2 years ago that hits oxygen for the first time in all of that time, and the aroma is very special. So I hope many of you can be there. I promise we will talk about it on social media, and we'll make sure we let everybody know. In the meantime, while we do not have a Berkeley store, Detroit is still happy to see you come by, and things are going well there, and we're experimenting with all sorts of new fun stuff. And we're going to take a little break on the tastings to open up the new store. So I apologize that we won't be there in October and December and November, but we'll get back to tastings in the new year. And so many of the ideas that we explored this year came from either the Mongers or from you guys. And so please continue to let us know what you want to dive into. We did a conserva tasting this year. We did a lot of different cool things. And I so appreciate the input that we got from you guys. I mean, the New Year's tasting was from you guys. And, it's just been a heck of a year for all of us. And I'm just so thankful for this little community that we have on these tastings. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much. I know Will echoes that. He's, running around with 2 screaming kids right now, so he's not on, but thank you guys so much.
We do have a couple things that have popped in. So we did get a question, when is the plan on the next tasting? So as you mentioned, there's no tasting planned right now, though we will likely do another on-demand tasting like we did with how to build a cheese board from last year. So keep an eye out for that, as we're going to come up with something that can satiate that craving at home on your own time.
And of course, there's always the private tastings right now. We currently, we've had this crazy pivot where we do this format quite often. And so if you and your group wants to get together and do one of these private events, or you and your colleagues or your clients, please reach out to us at info@Mongers Provisions, or on the website. There's actually a whole form you can fill out to talk about the event you're hoping to have. We're still doing those, and we just want to kind of save our bandwidth for opening up the store. So there will still be some tastings, but different.
We also got so speaking of events, and I know we'll have this new larger space. Will the new store offer more space for cheese making classes? Thinking back to the mozzarella making class in 2019, we obviously did a lot of events in store in Detroit prior to the pandemic as well. So what does that vision look like as we enter 2022?
Yeah, God willing, we can all get back together to, no masks and eating in person. I've loved this virtual landscape that we've been able to gather around, and we now have people from all over the state, sometimes all over the country, all at one time. But there is still nothing like being in the room where it happens or smelling the things we're talking about. And so the new store has a back of the house. For those who've been to Detroit, it's almost like I don't know, if you thought we had a back of the house, you were wrong. There's just a dish pit and a computer back there and barely enough room to walk. And so the new store is going to have a whole back area for prep, which means like 3 or 4 long tables that we can all sit around that aren't full of merchandise. And so it's going to be really exciting to bring people back in there. And we're hoping to do things like how to build the cheese board again in person. Benji, as he mentioned, is we're going to try to come up with another on-demand virtual experience. We're teasing it going to be, I can tease it out here, but we're thinking about doing like a fondue box and us walking you through some of the recipes. We had such fun doing the picnic tasting, which had a bunch of recipes. And so that kind of came out of that idea. So that will definitely have that. I'm trying to think what else that new store will have. Benji, are there any other questions about this? And I mentioned, I think, mid-October. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, mid-October. No other questions. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Obviously, the store will be expanded, some more charcuterie options as well. We'll have the same chocolates that everyone loves. All that fun stuff. So no, I think you've covered it all.
Awesome. Well, friends, please stop by Detroit. If you're not close to Detroit, you can always find us at mongersprovisions.com, and you should have a discount. Oh, you guys aren't usually first-time buyers, I guess, but if anybody hasn't bought something off the website before, taste testers will get you 10% off your first purchase. Check out the website. We're always adding new products to that. And, really, I just want to once again repeat, thank you guys so much for being here always and choosing to be entertained this way. And thank you for our amazing cheesemakers for staying on and answering questions in the chat and just all the work you guys do. We're very proud to be able to talk about you guys and tell your story. So thank you very, very much.